On this Thursday night on baseball's opening day, we reveal one reason it is so expensive to see Toronto's team play live. A CBC News investigation finds that almost half the tickets were held by scalpers and that the Blue Jays got a cut of the action on the resales. But will business get in the way of the game's pure pleasure?
Also tonight, we're digging into the government's new plan to unclog the judicial system.
And were flight attendants at Air Canada really told by their bosses to show more cleavage? This is The National.
If you were counting on the opening day for baseball in Canada to offer a little bit of hope about Canada's team, the Blue Jays, forget it, they lost. But in some odd ways, the team is winning big with your money. A joint investigation by CBC News and the Toronto Star reveals nearly half of the tickets for today's home opener wound up on reseller websites, often with big markups, forcing fans to pay so much more. And as Dave Seglin's found out, a certain baseball team is getting a cut of the action.
Opening day, the most anticipated day of the year for baseball fans. A sure sellout and a prime target for scalpers.
How much you pay?
God, $200 for four.
Over asking or over face value?
Way over, double.
How do you feel about that?
It's not good, but it is what it is.
It was 140 ticket.
Compared with face value, what's that?
It was $70 a ticket face value.
So you're paying what?
Double the price.
We took a closer look at ticket sales in a first-of-its-kind investigation, and we tracked every seat for today's game and found bad news for fans. Almost 46,000 seats in the stadium. They go up for sale at the box office and were quickly bought up. But then many reappeared on resale websites. 20,000 tickets being scalped on Tickets Now, SeatGeek, Vivid Seats, and StubHub. In all, 45% of the entire stadium. Scalpers standing to make millions in profits.
Right here behind home plate, this section has about 350 seats. About 100 of them we found up on resale websites. This seat, face value is $148, on StubHub for $410 plus fees. And guess what? The Blue Jays get a cut of that markup.
StubHub, the world's biggest online ticket reseller, has deals with many sports teams.
Look, we don't disclose what the revenue share agreement with Major League Baseball is, but it's a good amount. they do very well, let's put it that way.
So any ticket that sells on StubHub that's a Blue Jays ticket, Blue Jays take a share of?
Correct.
That's greasy. Yeah.
Why?
What? Because they're getting money on top of the money that they're already supposed to get? Come on. Sounds unethical to me.
Fans are being misled, says this business professor.
They know they're going to pay a premium on StubHub, but where it's not disclosed that the Blue Jays are making some of that money back, that's unethical, I think. It's certainly, you could even question whether it's anti-competitive as well. If I was the Competition Bureau, I'd be interested in taking a look at that arrangement.
The Blue Jays declined our requests for comment, but on their deal with StubHub, the CEO, Mark Shapiro, told Sportsnet last week that the Jays want to embrace this scalping market. The Blue Jays expect today's game will be the biggest moneymaker in their stadium's history. Dave Seglin, CBC News, Toronto.
So just how do professional ticket brokers get a hold of their tickets? One way that might surprise you, many of the resellers are actually season ticket holders. And the president of the Toronto Blue Jays admitted as much on Sportsnet Radio.
You had a season ticket base of 20,000 last year. How much of that base was actually ticket brokers rather than fans?
Probably about 50%.
The ball spinning a little bit more.
In fact, some teams even encourage ticket brokers. The Seattle Mariners, for example, has a dedicated page explaining how they can buy season's tickets, even giving out special broker pricing. And brokers say it's not just for baseball, but for virtually every sport: hockey, basketball, and football.
We do buy and speculate that we think that the team is going to do well for that year, and when they don't, we take a beating and we're selling them for well below cost. And then we also get them from season ticket holders themselves that have a surplus of tickets that they can't use for the entire year, and they'll sell off a quarter season or a half season.
So the CBC News investigative team that tracked those Blue Jays baseball tickets is working away on a whole bunch of other stories. We'll have those in the weeks ahead, Rosie.
Okay, Adrian, the federal government is proposing an ambitious set of changes to the criminal justice system. And if a new omnibus bill is passed, the impacts could be felt right across the country, from defendants to victims and in communities long marginalized. Bill C-75 would change the way juries are selected and how some accused of domestic violence are treated when asking for bail. Other changes appear to address the so-called Jordan decision, a landmark ruling by the Supreme Court that focused attention on the slow pace of justice. We'll tie those pieces together tonight, starting with the problem of clogged courts. On a human scale, the changes could be profound. Less time getting to trial, less time agonizing over an outcome, but not everyone is convinced that a faster system will be a just system. As Catherine Cullen tells us, some victims' families feel left behind.
Tell me about your favorite picture up here.
The 3 kids.
Yeah. When was that?
Because I don't see that ever again.
The killing of Nakonael's son Fuad is a prime example of the effect the Jordan ruling can have. Justice! She and her family were outraged when her son's accused murderer was let go because his case took too long to get to trial. A new trial has started, but it's been delayed too. She doesn't have much faith left in the system, but says she supports one of the Justice Minister's proposed fixes, limiting preliminary inquiries to all but the most serious offenses.
It's basically like going through a trial, so why don't we skip all that and go straight to the trial?
The Justice Minister argues it will make a big difference.
This bold reform will substantively contribute to the reduction of the delays in provinces.
But not everyone is convinced.
A preliminary inquiry ends up saving a lot of time down the road. It narrows issues, it shortens trials, and sometimes it eliminates the need for trials.
There are other changes, too, intended to unclog the court system, changing the rules for administration of justice offenses.
Which are really just breaching court orders. You're told not to drink, don't drink. They're going to take those out of the regular criminal justice system.
Changing bail procedures.
What it means is that bail hearings are going to be faster and more streamlined. More people are going to be released, and they're going to be released with fewer conditions and less onerous conditions.
And reclassifying indictable offenses.
It's probably going to help delay in Superior Court, but it's probably going to make it worse in Provincial Court.
But the Justice Minister didn't move with one big change many expected, doing away with mandatory minimum sentences. The Conservatives championed them as part of a tough-on-crime approach, but some lawyers argue they discourage plea deals, pushing defendants to go to trial.
It elongates the court process and matters go to trial that otherwise wouldn't have. That's where the Justice Minister should be looking.
The minister didn't offer any clear explanation as to why she's still waiting to make changes.
Mandatory minimum penalties and sentencing reform needs to be dealt with.
Well, Nakonael hopes her wait to see justice will end.
It's a slow death. It's slow death.
Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
When it comes to speeding up the snail's pace of justice, a major concern is there are simply not enough judges. And across the country, there are existing positions that remain vacant. Across Canada, including federal courts, there are 56 unfilled judgeships. That's about 6% of Canada's total federally appointed judicial positions. But some parts of the country are worse than others. Ontario and Quebec, for example, have a 3% vacancy rate. In Alberta, though, it's 15%. And that's actually after a hiring spree that happened just last year. But as we mentioned, Bill C-75 goes beyond the issue of unclogging the courts. It completely alters the way courts treat those with a history of domestic violence when they ask for bail. Joanna Remiliotis tells us why for some this change could be a matter of life and death.
It's a stark reality. Every 6 days in Canada, a woman is killed by her intimate partner. This year alone, in this province alone, 12 women died in alleged domestic violence crimes. And what's worse, most of the time, it comes as no surprise.
It's a very personal risk. It's not random. You're the target.
This woman asked us to obscure her identity. She's still afraid of her former partner.
It's terrifying. It's every minute of every day and night, you're wondering if he's coming to hurt you or hurt the kids.
The woman's abuser was eventually convicted, but only after years of stalking her. Proposed legislation would make it harder for people like him to be released on bail again. The onus would be on repeat offenders to convince judges to set them free while they await trial. Leanne Burns runs an Ottawa shelter. She says it could mean the difference between life and death.
Women have been further harassed, assaulted, or even killed while their former abusive partners are out on bail.
Burns points to the Basil Borutsky case. He was found guilty of murdering 3 of his former partners in a shocking one-day killing rampage. It's considered one of the worst cases of domestic violence in Canadian history. But the fact Borutsky had been in court for assaulting his victims before he killed them is not unusual. Peter Jaffe is reviewing more than 300 domestic homicide cases in Ontario. In 3/4 of the cases, there were warning signs: stalking, harassment, a history of assault convictions.
These homicides don't happen out of the blue, and it's important that the justice system takes domestic violence seriously. When there's warning signs, I think there has to be an increasing onus on what we do to hold the perpetrator accountable and what we do to try to protect victims in those circumstances.
If I was making the rules, there would be no bail.
For survivors, the sooner the better, before it's too late again. Joanna Rimiliotis, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, today's bill would alter another legal process in Canada that's been around for more than a century, the peremptory challenge. Those allow the Crown and the defense to exclude jurors during jury selection without giving a cause, a process that came to national attention in a recent case. During the trial of Gerald Stanley in the death of Colton Boushie, Stanley's lawyer used peremptory challenges to remove 4 Indigenous jurors from the case.
It was really difficult to sit there today and watch every single visible Indigenous person be challenged by the defense.
After Stanley was acquitted, those juror challenges confirmed the suspicions of some and raised pressure on the government.
As a country, we must and we can do better.
But this criminal lawyer says peremptory challenges do serve a purpose. Say if a juror's social media posts include something that raises hard-to-prove concerns about impartiality, for instance.
Just because there's a possibility that there could be an abusive strategy or somebody could try to use it wrong isn't a good reason to abolish it.
If the bill passes, a juror can still be challenged with cause, subject to a judge's approval. Okay, Andrew, now you're tracking a complaint against Air Canada.
Yeah, Rosie, and a serious one, too. The company may be headed straight to a human rights tribunal and a showdown, not with passengers, but with the union that represents its flight attendants. Some of them are claiming sexual harassment and discrimination by management, and their list of complaints is long. Jacqueline Hansen tells us why.
The complaints made against Air Canada by the union are detailed. Among them, allegations that flight attendants were required to model new uniforms, to strut their stuff and be judged by management. It claims they were critiqued for having skin that was too white or eyes that were too small. The union says female employees were even told to dress to show more cleavage. Air Canada says there is no systemic issue at the airline, that it has zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination, and that the union didn't share any concerns with the airline prior to filing this complaint.
Harassment in the airline industry is an ongoing, prevalent issue.
Mandalena Lewis is a former flight attendant at both Air Canada and WestJet. In 2016, she launched a lawsuit against WestJet, alleging a pilot sexually assaulted her and that the airline didn't adequately investigate or respond. She started a class action lawsuit as well. 2 years later, both cases are still in progress. For her, hearing allegations from other flight attendants is a boost.
People are finding a way to break their silence. The risk that I took coming forward now feels like it was worth it.
Harassment in the industry is getting more attention lately. Just last week, the head of the U.S. Flight Attendants Union called for airline CEOs to denounce objectification of flight attendants.
We are called pet names, patted on the rear when a passenger wants our attention, cornered in the back galley and asked about our hottest layover, and subjected to incidents too awful to recall.
This employment lawyer expects there could be complaints in other industries as well in the wake of the Me Too movement.
People are feeling more confidence to bring these kind of complaints when they are hearing that others are experiencing similar circumstances.
Air Canada says it takes such matters very seriously, and its flight attendants are showing
that they do as well. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
Lots more still ahead on the National. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has had better weeks. First, he punished a senior MP, only to have to backtrack after criticism. What's really going on inside the party? The at-issue gang has some thoughts.
And Malala Yousafzai is back in Pakistan for the first time since she was shot nearly 6 years ago. We will hear her emotional message to her homeland.
First, though, the clock is ticking for Theresa May. 1 year left to figure out how to make Brexit as smooth as possible, while at the same time watching her own back.
I wouldn't want to make any predictions other than one of the guys standing behind her will start the stabbing and the rest of them will jump in and try and take her job.
Exactly 1 year left until Brexit takes effect, and still so much to do. No one knows that better than Prime Minister Theresa May, who has hit the road to reassure a skeptical nation. Nella Ayed takes a closer look at her sales pitch.
A rare timeout today for Theresa May. Carefully scripted stops, captive audiences only. Her nearly 2 years on the job, mostly a sprint to deliver Brexit to a country divided, nothing if not hectic and turbulent. A year out, does she think it will be worth it?
I think there's a bright future out there. And yes, I think Brexit is going to deliver. A country, it will be different, but I think there are real opportunities for us as an independent nation for the future.
When Britain went for Brexit and she inherited 10 Downing Street, few imagined she'd survive long.
I think she's probably their best hope, but I don't think that means that she's qualified for the job.
But her fate would converge with Brexit's, whose beginnings are chronicled in the very first issue of the monthly Brexit comic.
We are a very divided country still, and the problem is there is no place to go to talk about that, which is why, for me, the Brexit comic is the place to go. We are not informed even now.
The problem is, no one yet knows where the Brexit story is going.
I wouldn't want to make any predictions other than one of the guys standing behind her will start the stabbing and the rest of them will jump in and try and take her job.
Likely not before she sees Brexit through, to the benefit of all British, she says. And yet doubts remain among the Remainers, who believe Britain has been swindled, expectations defying reality. A younger generation especially galled by allegations the Leave campaign may have cheated. They'd like a second vote.
You know, the word illegal and Brexit is really serious. So I feel, I don't know what the answer is, but this needs to be taken seriously. This can't be swept under the carpet like we're so used to.
Come what may, she says, Brexit will happen. Her popularity's seen a little bump since her response to the nerve agent attack. But the tight Brexit deadline is what keeps her afloat.
I think she may, if she lasts another year, be remembered as the person who dealt with the problem left by her predecessor, David Cameron, who in his very cavalier manner left her a very difficult thing to deal with.
Brexit, in whatever form, will be her legacy. Nala Ayed, CBC News, London.
For many fishermen in Cornwall on the southwest tip of England, March 2019 cannot come soon enough. The end, they believe, of EU interference in their livelihoods. With Brexit, the hope is local fishermen will take back control of their waters. But as Margaret Evans explains, they could be in for a raw deal.
Dawn, and the promise of riches on the horizon for those who wait. For the fishermen of Cornwall, the waiting is nearly over, and with it will come liberation, or so they believe.
We are an island race. This is what we do. We go to sea and trading and fishing.
David Stevens skippers a trawler out of Newlyn Harbour. He says his government betrayed its own fleet by allowing European boats access to Britain's waters when it joined the EU back in 1973.
It was sold out to go into the EU. It's now being sold out to get out of the EU, which is just unbelievable.
EU quotas mean that nearly 60% of the fish caught in waters around the UK are landed by other EU fleets. There are complicated reasons: historical catches, sustainability, and the transient nature of fish. But it grates.
25 different species, and each one has a different quota level. And the UK has very little quota for quite a few of those species, so trying to manage that catch is just unbelievably difficult.
And there are worries history could repeat, even as Britain leaves the EU.
Most of the fish landed at Newlyn Harbour is actually exported, and in fact, 75% of the entire British catch goes to the European Union, and that gives the EU a bargaining chip down the road.
620, 640, 60, 680, 680.
Exporters battle it out for the best of the catch at Newlands Fish Market every morning, not always getting what they want. Edwin Hosking wants out of the EU, but he hopes it won't affect his access to their markets.
We do export 30% of our fish, and we have assurances from the French supermarkets that nothing's going to change on their part. We should still get the orders.
But if Britain wants to keep its access to EU markets, then Europe will surely demand to keep its access to British waters. And the government might give in. The fishing industry may tug at the heartstrings, but it accounts for less than 1% of Britain's economy. And not everyone in Cornwall thinks they'll be better off outside the EU. Skipper Tom McClure voted to stay in.
I voted to remain for a lot of different reasons, really. It wasn't just about fishing, I just saw the broader picture, really. The EU is very good at giving out grants and stuff like that, and that was part of the basis. I've had 3 grants to do work on this boat.
You might not look it, but Cornwall is one of the poorest regions in Britain, and as such, entitled to substantial EU funding. The Newlyn Fish Market, for example, is getting a facelift courtesy of EU money. Farmers and the flower industry also rely on EU workers, taking the jobs some in Cornwall won't. Even David Stevens employs Latvian crewmen aboard his trawler. But for him, he says, it's a question of identity.
If it wasn't for the sea, there wouldn't be an island race. We wouldn't be the people we are. We are British because we have the sea.
And so they wait for what they hope will be a new dawn, not just for the fisheries, but a way of life. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Cornwall.
Still ahead tonight on The National, Donald Trump seems to have done it again. We'll break down what he said about Canada today to a room packed with supporters that just doesn't quite ring true.
But first, the At Issue gang is here. Chantal, Paul, and Marie are going to give us their thoughts on Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. Are we seeing signs this week of a rift? That's next.
Tonight on The National, doctors in the UK say the daughter of a former Russian spy is getting better, no longer in critical condition. Her father, Sergei Skripal, is still in critical but stable condition. They were both exposed to a nerve agent, an attack the UK and its allies have blamed on Russia. Altogether, countries around the world, including Canada and the US, have expelled more than 150 Russian officials in retaliation. But Moscow says it did nothing wrong and it's fighting back.
Меры будут зеркальными.
Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Russia will close down the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg and expel 60 American diplomats, and that's not all. He says other countries that expelled Russians will face similar action. Well, a story now that goes to show you fact-checking the U.S. president is something of an ongoing process. You remember when Donald Trump admitted a few weeks ago to pulling trade numbers out of thin air in a meeting with Justin Trudeau, just making them right up. Well, today, Trump was back in front of the microphone with another story about Canada that just didn't stack up with the facts. And he was speaking to a crowd in Ohio when he brought up his decision to approve TransCanada's Keystone XL pipeline.
I get elected, I approve it almost like in the first day, right at the very beginning. And I just say to myself, can you imagine the boss of whatever the hell company it is, who never actually called me to say thank you, but that's okay. We'll remember.
Now, the boss he was referring to is TransCanada CEO Russ Girling. But here's the thing. Girling was in the Oval Office on the day the president signed the order approving the pipeline. He didn't call because he was physically there. And during that event, he was captured on video saying thank you.
Again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and we're not going to let you down, sir.
Well, thank you, Russ. And I know.
CBC News reached out to TransCanada about the U.S. president's remarks today. They told us no comment.
I think things could have been handled better, and so these are certainly learning experiences for us as we move forward. I think we need to build a stronger relationship working with the leaders team in caucus.
Those were, frankly, some of the kinder words that Charlie Angus had for NDP leader Jagmeet Singh this week. A hope for more FaceTime, maybe a better relationship. Singh drove a bit of a wedge between himself and his caucus by punishing veteran MP David Christopherson for voting with the Conservatives on a controversial summer jobs motion in the House. Singh took Christopherson off a parliamentary committee, then changed his mind and put him back on it. But how much damage has already been done? No better group to ask that question than At Issue. Marie Vestel is in Ottawa with me tonight. So is Paul Wells. And Chantal Hébert is, of course, in Montreal. Good to see everybody. Okay, this was a strange one because I wasn't expecting discipline to happen so quickly. And I think the way that Jagmeet Singh handled it was a little questionable. Chantal, what should we take from this?
That becoming federal leader is a steep learning curve, that becoming a federal politician is a steep learning curve, that the combination of the two of them for a seatless leader is turning out to be quite a challenge. This is not the first time that Jagmeet Singh is forced by caucus to correct his course. It's the third that we know about. Bilingualism for Supreme Court justices, remember, he mused about maybe in the case of Indigenous Canadians, we could drop that. It's been a long-standing cause of the NDP that Supreme Court justices should be able to hear arguments in both languages. Then last week, correcting the course on attending events where there are Sikh activists promoting violence to achieve their means. And then this, which I think was the more serious one because it went straight to caucus unity and the blood was spilled in public.
And did he have a choice, Paul? Was there any other option here than to put Mr. Christopherson back into his place?
I'm given to understand that the plan was always to put Mr. Christopherson back after a while. This was essentially a stint in the penalty box. It was substantially foreshortened after Charlie Angus criticized the leader publicly. It's interesting, there's kind of a pendulum that swings in party leadership from one style of leadership to another, from the sometimes lackadaisical Jean Chrétien to the hyperactive Paul Martin many years ago. Remember that Jagmeet Singh is the leader because the party was sick of Tom Mulcair, who was a master of parliamentary procedure, but seemed sometimes to be too much a creature of the House of Commons and unable to reach outside it. Now they've got a leader who sometimes seems unable to reach inside it and connect to the caucus, and he's paying the price for that.
And I wonder how much is due to that, Marie, the fact that he doesn't have a seat, he isn't around a whole lot. I don't see him around a whole lot. No. How much does that have to do with his connections with caucus and sort of getting a read of the room?
Well, I think it has a whole lot to do with it. I think the Christopherson issue translated both of the problems that Chantal alluded to. First off, that he doesn't necessarily know the nuance of federal policy, because in this case, David Christopherson didn't vote with the Conservatives on this motion because he suddenly was not pro-choice anymore. He said he remained pro-choice, which is the NDP's policy, but he felt that the Liberals' change to the attestation for summer jobs grants applications was too restrictive. It didn't let people have the freedom to disagree with the law, even if they agreed to respect it, just to personally disagree with it. And so I think it showed that he didn't grasp the nuance of this thing that has been discussed in the House of Commons for months now. But it also translated the other problem with him not being in Ottawa more than what I think is a few hours a week, because he didn't feel, first off, that David Christopherson felt this very deeply enough to vote against his party, but also that from what we've heard, he wasn't the only one. There were other MPs who had the same malaise with voting against the Conservative motion for the same reasons that David Christopherson did.
You seem to suggest, though, in a column this week, Paul, that this is not, fatal, that no one needs to panic yet.
Well, I actually I suggested the NDP had better not panic, in the sense that they're stuck with this leader until the next election, or trying to replace him would cause its own set of problems. If getting rid of Tom Mulcair was a mistake, and different people can reach different conclusions, I think it was a huge mistake. Getting rid of Jagmeet Singh as leader would compound the error and give the impression that the NDP has no idea what it wants to do. This party has to learn to work together. Clearly, the leader has to get to know the caucus. There should be some sort of formal committee system which includes veteran members of caucus working with the leader on the daily and weekly agendas. But also the caucus is going to have to learn to get to know the leader. I think an off-site retreat like you do in a troubled workplace would not be a bad idea. Like trust exercises, falling into each other's arms and stuff like
something.
that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, but sometimes I don't disagree with any of that, although I think it's a bit charitable on Paul's part. There are times when provincial politicians do not actually manage to make that transition. I'll name two of them, Stockwell Day and Martine Ouellet. And what they have in common with Mr. Singh is that they were sitting members of provincial assemblies, that they were elected with the help of a push for a very different message, and then they could not make it work with caucus, and they disappeared.
And that's
will
a
disappear.
warning to Jagmeet Singh that you shouldn't probably ignore the tensions with your caucus too long, because she lost 7 of her 10 MPs.
Yeah, although she's still there for whatever reason. Okay, I want to get to the actual issue that this was about, because, and this speaks a little bit to what Chantal wrote this week, we're just stealing ideas from you guys, around the Liberals' attempt to influence social policy, maybe create social wedges. Here's a little bit of what the Prime Minister said about the summer job grants program.
We will stand up for women's rights. We will defend women's rights and the rights of the LGBT community, regardless of what folks in certain religious groups try to push us against.
I don't have a ton of time here, but Chantal, is this an attempt, between this and some other things, to, I don't know, smoke out some of the parts of the Conservative Party? Is it a wedge? Are they scaring off people that like Liberals but have positions on these issues? What's going on here?
Or keep people who used to vote for the NDP and went and voted for Justin Trudeau on side. I don't know if that was the plan, but it has not worked well. There are too many people like Christopherson, to name him, who are pro-choice and pro-LGBT rights, but feel this was heavy-handed. I covered the abortion debate in the House of Commons. Part of the entire debate was about no government imposing its conviction on abortion on women. It didn't say imposing the conviction that people like or don't like. It was get out of women's business with deciding what they do about carrying a pregnancy to term.
Marie, you also found that there's a link here between a few things that the Liberals have tried over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think it's been a tendency of this government to maybe push their ideological beliefs, which are very strong convictions of Mr. Trudeau, but I don't think it's necessarily the best strategy to push them down people's throats. The Conservatives were criticized for being too ideological. It's not necessarily better to be too ideological just because you're on the other side of the social spectrum. I think there is a risk here. There are polls already showing that men who supported the Liberals in 2015, of that number, a third have now changed their minds. I don't think this is completely not related to what we are discussing. And I think David Christopherson is a prime example of someone who agrees with these positions but doesn't think that they should be pushed so harshly. And even a Liberal like Scott Sims, who also voted with the Conservatives on this motion on the summer jobs grant attestation, it's a Liberal MP. And he is having a hard time with it. I think that probably gives you an idea that there are probably Liberal voters who are also starting to find this a little bit much, that Justin Trudeau perhaps shouldn't behave like he's, Justin Trudeau, the school teacher, telling people how they should think or what they should or should not think.
But if you take that, Paul, with guns would be another example, the racism hearings that they're doing that could be a can of worms they may regret opening up. Is there something going on here strategically that we should try and understand? Or is it just, as Marie says, they're trying to drive their ideological positions?
I think these guys are increasingly in love with their own view of the world, and they need to understand that even some Canadians who share their opinions on these divisive issues don't like it when their neighbors are told how to behave by the government. That was what brought down Stephen Harper in 2015. A lot of Canadians were uncomfortable with veiled voting. They were not sure what to think of Syrian refugees, but they did not like the spectacle of a government that was capitalizing on it. And the other thing is, Justin Trudeau needs to know that when he plays both ends of the field, we see him. There is not a Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist holy day on the calendar that is not welcomed with effusive praise from the Prime Minister of Canada. And he always forgets to say, in a little asterisk at the bottom, unless you hold anti-choice views, so when he goes seeking the approval of every religious group in the country, and then goes to a fundraiser in Montreal and tells people he's going to stand up to those same religious groups, we see him.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you all for this week. Appreciate it. Good news for all of you who love politics as much as all of them and me. At Issue is also a podcast. You get extra content and what we just talked about here, the main panel, podcast form every week. This week on the podcast, we check in on how the Liberals are doing on their commitment to curb climate change. Look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational. A correction now on a story we brought you on Monday night about alleged serial killer Bruce McArthur. We showed you a photograph in which we misidentified someone as being Bruce McArthur. We have since been in contact with the affected individual and apologize for the error.
We have a lot more still ahead tonight. Malala Yousafzai says it feels like home again. We'll have her emotional return to Pakistan, the country where she was nearly killed. First, though, as we go to break, remember you can go deeper on the stories of the day earlier in the day. Please subscribe to our newsletter at cbcnews.ca/thenational. The National Today takes you inside our journalism every afternoon.
Kevin Pillar, first pitch swinging, deep left center. It's gone!
Okay, so one down, 161 regular season games to go. Blue Jays baseball is back. Certainly lots to watch for on the field, but this year, anyone attending a game will also notice something outside the Rogers Centre. The mayor says there's no new specific threat, but as Ron Charles tells us, there are some new precautions.
This is something Toronto sports fans and concert goers will see a lot more of this year. More concrete barricades, more police officers, more roads closed to traffic sometimes before and always after events. Authorities picked today's Blue Jays home opener to launch the enhanced security measures. Toronto's mayor says the new measures are not a reaction to a specific threat.
It's 2018, and we've seen incidents happen, unfortunately, outside of sports venues and concert venues and so on around the world that would have caused us, as we did, we meaning the police, the security officials, and everybody else, to review security.
Those incidents that happened around the world include vehicles used as weapons of terror to kill dozens of people in Germany, France, and Spain. While Canada's official threat level has stood at medium for the past 4 years, a former CSIS analyst says enhancing security is just the new normal.
It's very unlikely we're going to have any kind of major incident, but I think that people want to make sure that they've done what they can without being overzealous, without being absolutely crazy in terms of their security precautions, but doing nothing is no longer an option.
He says it's very likely Toronto police consulted Canada's spy agencies, particularly the Integrated Terrorism Assessment Centre, which sets the national threat level. That's something the mayor hinted at but refused to elaborate on.
Well, I'm not going to name them, but I can just tell you that I was able to look at, documentation that was put together by a combination of police services, plural, and security agencies to review, really just the kind of assessment that would be made of public buildings like this that attract large crowds on a repeated basis.
The new measures were put through their paces tonight, just as the 50,000 Blue Jays fans left the game. Thousands of people arrived just blocks away for a concert by New Zealand pop star Lorde. Ron Charles, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, alongside the baseball, fans in this country were also remembering two great players with deep Canadian connections. Roy Halladay was honored in Toronto.
Legends never die, right? He's going to be around. He's going to be on the level of excellence forever.
He was just one of those players that everybody loves.
Halladay's widow and two sons were on the field for the ceremony. The man known as Doc pitched for the Jays from 1998 through to 2009 and is only the second Blue Jay to have his jersey retired. He died last November at the age of 40 in a plane crash off Florida. Meanwhile, Montreal fans are mourning the death of Daniel "Rusty" Staub, arguably Major League's first superstar in Canada. Originally from New Orleans, Staub joined the Montreal Expos from Houston for their very first season in the majors in 1969. He became an instant fan favorite. Maybe it was that shock of red hair. That's where the nickname Rusty came from. Fans also called him Le Grand Orange.
Je crois que nous gagnerons.
Staub also embraced the French language. That was a big hit, but it was his ability on the diamond that spoke loudest. When the Expos were dead last in 1970, he hit a career-high 30 home runs. 2 years later, he'd leave for the New York Mets, but he came back to Montreal for another 38 games in 1979.
In each person's life, there are very special days that happen. Today, you give me one of those days.
In 1993, Staub's number 10 became the first to be retired by the Expos or any Canadian team, and he entered the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame 6 years ago. Staub died in Florida just hours before the new season's first pitch and 3 days short of turning 74. And we are back in a moment with tonight's moment. First, though, remember you can get the real story from CBC News journalists all day long. Find powerful images on Instagram, exclusive video on Facebook, and tweet us at CBC The National.
So that Korea come after Japan in English dictionary.
That's your most messed up conspiracy theory yet.
Not conspiracy theory, conspiracy truth.
A new way to watch CBC. Download the CBC TV app.
Whatever it is that you wear to work every day, if it's a business or opera.
A new way to watch CBC. Download the CBC TV app.
Tonight on The National, protesters back on the streets of Sacramento, California, demanding justice in the case of Stephon Clark. He was the black man shot dead by police in his grandmother's backyard earlier this month. Officers thought he had a gun, but he was actually holding a cell phone. Earlier today, hundreds gathered for Clark's funeral.
No, this is not a local matter. They've been killing young black men all over the country. It's time for politicians to come out their office. It's time for us to go down and stop this madness.
Reverend Al Sharpton vowing today to push for justice for Stephon Clark. California's Attorney General has promised an independent investigation. 3 years after the podcast Serial captivated North America and brought renewed attention to a murder case dating back to 1999, the man convicted of the killing is one big step closer to getting a new trial. Today, a Maryland appeals court ruled Adnan Syed should get another chance to defend himself. His lawyers argued that he didn't get a proper defense during his original trial. 18 years ago, Syed was convicted of murdering his ex-girlfriend. Prosecutors could still appeal today's ruling. And in just a few hours, mass protests are expected to begin on the Gaza border. And in preparation, Israel has sent 100 snipers to the area. The country's foreign ministry calls the protests a deliberate attempt to provoke a violent confrontation. But for Palestinians, tomorrow's annual Land Day commemoration marks the beginning of 6 weeks of demonstrations. They're protesting for the right of return of Palestinian refugees to what is now Israel. The protests also coincide with the beginning of the Jewish holiday of Passover.
It's been an emotional homecoming for the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. Malala Yousafzai is back in Pakistan for the first time in 6 years after Taliban militants targeted her. The young activist, who has remained a polarizing figure in Pakistan, said today was the happiest day of her life. Her speech is our moment of the day.
I still can't believe that this is actually happening. From growing up in Swat Valley to then seeing extremism and terrorism in 2007 till 2009, and then seeing how many difficulties women and girls face in our society and how we can fight against those challenges. I can move on the streets, I can meet people, I can talk to people, and there is my old home again.
You know, it is hard to understand just how difficult a trip this must have been for Yousafzai. And indeed, much of the trip has been shrouded in a kind of secrecy. I mean, we know some of who she's been traveling with, her family members. We know she met with the Prime Minister. But because of the ever-present security threat, I mean, she has to keep active watch, and there's a lot we don't know.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, if you think about what makes it brave about her going back, part of it is that she's not entirely viewed sort of universally as a national hero then. Some people have been very cruel to her online. There's a whole segment of the population that tried to ban her book that said the attack was staged, and that the more she was embraced by, you know, the United States or Europe, the more she was pushed away at home. So the dangers for her, aside from, you know, some societal cruelties, are still very real.
And in spite of all that, she said that she dreamed of going back to her home country. It's the thing she wanted most to do, and just last week tweeted memories of it, playing cricket on rooftops and all sorts of things. So obviously it was important for her to go back and reconnect with the people and the place. All right, that's The National for March 29th. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.